So I understand you've been having a little bit of trouble with your latest dungeon run. Tell me, have you considered a charm bracelet? Today, I'm going to be offering some focused advice for players who are asking the question, is Pathfinder 2E too hard, on this episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Mark and I am the Local Disaster Tour Guide. That's right, I'm a storyteller who is encouraging my party to work together. And I promise it's not because I'm trying to set them up for an AoE. Welcome to my channel where we talk about role-playing games like Pathfinder and Starfinder. Today I'm going to be doing my second video in a series looking at the question, is Pathfinder 2E too hard? And specifically in this video, I'm going to be focusing on advice for players in Pathfinder 2nd Edition games who have found the game to be frustrating or difficult and are looking for ways to hopefully improve their experience with the game. Now, really quick, this is the second part in a 3-part video series. So if you haven't seen part 1 already, I'm going to try to throw a link up here so you can go and check that out. I actually do a deep dive into the specific mechanical issue that I think is tripping up a lot of players in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So if you want the full thesis statement on what I think the issue at hand might be, I definitely encourage you to go check out that video. A quick synopsis is this. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, level is added to the proficiency bonus of player characters and monsters. In most role-playing games, the statistics of monsters and challenges are very static. And most of the mathematical fluctuation actually occurs on the player side of the coin, kind of creating this mountain of challenges that player characters are attempting to overcome. However, Pathfinder 2nd Edition does it a little bit different. It uses a system that has mechanical flexibility on both sides of the scale. Player characters and monsters can see their abilities move up and down kind of based on the level of the PC or the challenge in question. If you've ever played any of the Elder Scrolls games, such as Skyrim, you know what this kind of system looks like. In that game, when you're level 5, the bandits are scaled for a level 5 character, and when you are level 25, the bandits are scaled for a level 25 character. The scaling nature of the numbers in that game help to create a particular equilibrium or balance between the abilities of your player character and the challenges that they face. Pathfinder 2nd Edition is much the same. Player characters and their challenges kind of scale with each other, and the game seeks to achieve a certain equilibrium between the two. Now personally, I don't think that Pathfinder 2E is too hard, but I can see how that difference in mechanical structure to the game could lead to frustrating situations for players and game masters. So, the question arises, what do we do about it? Well, in this video, I'm going to offer some player-focused advice, and then in the third video in this series, I'm going to go into some Game Master-specific tips to help Game Masters improve the experience at their table. But it is my hope that this video series can help you and your friends have a better experience with the game. My table has had a fantastic experience with Pathfinder 2E, and it is my hope that other people can have a wonderful experience as well. With that in mind, today I would like to offer 6 tips to players in Pathfinder 2nd Edition games. Tip number 1, when you are frustrated, re-examine the rules. Tip number 2, embrace the challenge. Know how to prepare and when to retreat. Tip number 3, make the most of exploration mode and downtime. Tip number 4, use those consumables. Tip number 5, action variety is essential. And tip number 6, take advantage of the flexible options inside of the game. Let's look at these each one by one. Tip number 1 is, when you are frustrated, re-examine the rules. Now, real quick before I go any farther with this video, this series is intended to be an encouraging and positive conversation. I realize that through a camera is not the best one-on-one dynamic, and so the intentions behind this video may not be as apparent as I hope they are. My group loves Pathfinder 2e, and we've had a fantastic time with it. And I intend for this series to be a very positive series. I want this to be something that is encouraging and helpful to people. But I realize that conversations on the internet can get toxic very easily. So please know that everything that I'm saying comes from a place of just genuinely wanting to help people, and that I encourage you to approach the conversation in that way. And the reason I give you that disclaimer is because this first tip could very easily be heard in a toxic fashion that I do not intend. When you are frustrated, re-examine the rules. This is not a learn to play. I realize that there are people out there who try to be gatekeepers on a hobby or a community. If you want to play with us, you've got to be good enough, and they'll push people out of a particular group or hobby or whatever. That is not what I am saying here. Instead, what I'm saying is this: frustration with the rules of a role-playing game quite often points to a lack of clarity or a misunderstanding when it comes to the rules of that specific game. Here's the reality. Nobody knows everything about their favorite role-playing game. No matter how much of a master you think you are, there are blind spots in the rules for your favorite game. I'm a big fan of Critical Role, and I've seen several episodes where Matthew Mercer will stop the game to open up the rulebooks for D&D 5th edition to check out some tidbit or nuance to the rules that he's not exactly clear on. Now, Matthew Mercer is a fantastic storyteller, and Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is pretty universally considered to be a pretty simple gaming system. It's very accessible. Do you mean to tell me that a fantastic storyteller doesn't know all of the rules of a simple game? Yeah. If it's true of Matthew Mercer, it's true of us. We don't know all of the rules to our favorite game, and on top of that, we don't know our blind spots. You don't know what you don't know until somebody shows you that you don't know it. How can we as gamers figure out our blind spots? Well, I've discovered that one of the best indicators of a blind spot when it comes to understanding rules is frustration. 9 times out of 10, if I am frustrated with a rule, the reality is I probably don't understand that rule. And if I go back and look at the rule and consider its context inside the system, usually that's going to clear up the vast majority of my frustration. Now, obviously, this could apply to any role-playing game out there. This advice is actually system neutral, but this happened to me with Pathfinder 2nd edition. In specific, it happened to me with the stealth rules for Pathfinder 2e. For a long time, I thought that stealth and detection in Pathfinder 2e was too clunky to be any use, and I just figured I was never really going to use it inside of the game. In fact, it was several months before I saw some videos by How It's Played and No Nat Ones. They did some videos on stealth and detection inside of Pathfinder 2e, and suddenly I realized I had a very distorted understanding of what those rules were supposed to be. Now, what happened to me when I was reading Pathfinder 2nd edition, very early in the book, I was reading through the Goblin Ancestry, and the Goblin Ancestry has this feat called Very Sneaky. And the mistake that I made is I read that Very Sneaky feat that modified the stealth rules, and I looked at that feat and assumed that I understood what these stealth rules were supposed to be, but I never went and read them. I invented a version of stealth in my mind and then modified it with the Goblin Ancestry feat and came to the conclusion that stealth just wasn't that good. And come to find out, the stealth rules in Pathfinder 2e are actually extremely useful. They are arguably the most useful set of rules I've ever seen for actually using stealth in combat. There was an area of the rules I was frustrated with, and it turns out I was frustrated with the rules not because they were badly designed, but because I didn't understand them properly. So, if you are encountering frustrations with Pathfinder 2e or any other game, my number one tip is this: use that frustration as a clue to go back and re-examine the rules and ask, is there something I don't understand, or is there something I have misinterpreted that is causing frustration when I play? Number 2 is embrace the challenge. Know how to prepare and know when to retreat. One of the arguments that I have seen several times in this conversation is Pathfinder 2e too hard. You'll see Pathfinder 2e supporters say, challenge isn't a bad thing, and I'll go ahead and say to a degree that's very true. A certain degree of challenge is actually necessary for a game to feel emotionally rewarding. So, in essence, part of this point is, if Pathfinder 2e is a challenging game, that's okay because overcoming those challenges is part of the emotional reward of play. However, I do want to give you a little bit of a glimpse behind the Game Master screen, because I think that may help you understand a little bit more what this game intends. I have a decade's worth of experience in Pathfinder 1st Edition, and I came from running Pathfinder 1st Edition as my primary game to now Pathfinder 2e is my primary game, and there was a very harsh lesson that I had to learn as a storyteller. And that is that encounter design is intended to be a lot more challenging in this game. I'm not going to go into the whole story here because it's kind of a long story. I'm going to save most of this for the Game Master video. But in Pathfinder 1st Edition, the encounter design table goes all the way up to Epic. And in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the encounter design table goes all the way up to Extreme. When I transferred from 1st Edition to 2nd Edition, I read those two tables as basically meaning the same thing. I looked at Epic and Extreme and I assumed that they meant the same thing in terms of what kind of encounter I would be running for my players. And I remember my very first Pathfinder 2nd Edition one-shot where I ran a severe encounter. Not an extreme encounter, a severe encounter. It is one step easier on the encounter design chart. And I almost achieved a TPK. It turns out the word severe means severe. My players were like in a state of legitimate dread and like struggling to survive the fight. And me as the storyteller, this is my first time running 2E, I'm sitting behind the screen like, oh my gosh, what have I dropped on my poor gaming group? In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, when a GM designs higher level challenges, they are intended to be extremely dangerous. In fact, the level of danger, severe in Pathfinder 2E, corresponds to epic in Pathfinder 1st Edition. So I guess as a bonus point, there's a possibility if you're frustrated with Pathfinder 2e that your Game Master hasn't realized how the challenge design works. But I want to go ahead and tell you, when you approach this game, understand that many of the challenges that are presented are intended to be very difficult. They are intended to be encounters where you have to play smart. They are intended to be encounters where you have to use good tactics, where you have to be well prepared in order to achieve success. There are certainly easy encounters too inside the game, But there is a certain level of difficulty that is baked into this game, which means that you as a player need to prepare yourself for the challenges you're going to face. Therefore, when you're playing Pathfinder 2nd Edition, let me just strongly encourage you, investigate before you dive into that dungeon. Create plans, consider tactics, develop strategies, prepare yourself for the encounters that are coming ahead, and don't just blindly wander into some things, because if you try to swing up in Pathfinder 2nd Edition and you aren't ready, you will get knocked down pretty quick. And another element of that is know when to retreat. If you encounter something that is a little too difficult with what your party is currently capable of doing, don't be afraid to retreat, regroup, and come back when you are adequately prepared for the challenge that you will be facing. That leads me into tip number 3, which is make good use of exploration mode and downtime. Pathfinder 2nd Edition is divided into several different categories of play. Encounter mode, the actual fight scenes. Exploration mode, which would be equivalent to exploring the dungeon room. And then downtime, which is your larger, less specific blocks of time. It's easy to focus a little too heavily on encounter mode, the actual fight scene, and forget about the impact of exploration mode and downtime mode. And the reality is, Pathfinder 2e has baked some excellent things into exploration mode and downtime mode that can help you be more successful inside of the game. Here are a few quick examples. In exploration mode, you can use the treat wounds activity. And actually, if you have the battle medicine skill feat, you can use treat wounds in encounter mode as well. But treat wounds in exploration mode is actually very powerful. I have seen numerous groups online report that they just had a few players take medicine skills and battle medicine and use treat wounds, and that they were able to function without a dedicated healer in the group. Now, none of my groups have tried that yet, so I can't tell you specifically if that's true, but I've seen this reported a lot of different places that good use of treat wounds can help a party succeed well past what they might normally be able to do. There are a lot of things you can do in exploration mode and downtime mode that will better prepare you for the challenges you face when the monsters are actually trying to attack you. Another good example, repair. Here in a minute we'll talk about raise shield and shield block, but Paizo has made shields a form of active defense in encounter mode. But one of the downsides to that is if your shield gets damaged, it can be destroyed. Well, you can also repair it. A character who takes the quick repair skill feat at level 2 can take a tower shield from 1 hit point, from the edge of destruction to full functionality with 2 minutes and 2 successful craft checks. That's not a lot of time. It doesn't affect the game much at all to say, while our party healer is patching people up with treat wounds, I'm going to take a couple of minutes and repair my shield, and suddenly your character is much more survivable in the next encounter. There are a lot of different strategies I could go into here. Pathfinder 2nd Edition mentions a lot of different things that you can do as exploration mode activities. Take a good look at these and figure out what's going to help you. Do you want one of your party members to scout ahead and give your party initiative bonuses? That's an option. Or do you want one of your characters to use the repeat a spell activity to cast detect magic as you are exploring and warn you of potential magical threats before it's too late? Consider the options that the game gives you in exploration and downtime mode and use those options to tip the scales in your favor when you actually roll initiative. But what about during the actual fights themselves? One of the things I want to go ahead and talk about is tip number 4, which is use your consumables. I have a terrible habit developed from many years of role-playing, which is, after about level 5, consumables don't exist in my brain. Over years of Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder 1st Edition, I've just kind of learned that consumables are pointless. You reach a point where you are so powerful that you just kind of assume you're never going to need them, and you completely forget that they're even on your character sheet. Trust me, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, those consumables are important. They are put into the game for a reason, and you want to make sure you are using the resources that the game gives you in order to succeed. To give you an example of how bad some role-playing games can be, I remember an old D&D 3.5 game where around level 15 or 16 I did an accounting of my player character's character sheets. And I discovered that my players had so many unused wands, potions, scrolls, different things like that, that I just kind of ended up selling all of the excess gear it was clear they were never going to use and rewarding them with straight up gold. And I gave every player in that group at least 50,000 gold. I'm not joking. That was how many consumable items they had acquired and never once taken advantage of. That doesn't work in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Consumables are intended to be part of what your character can do. They are intended to be part of what your character is capable of, and if you are overlooking your consumables, you are hamstringing yourself inside the game. And let me talk about one particular type of consumable, because when I started looking at Pathfinder 2nd Edition, I didn't understand this. There was a rule that Paizo added, and I just straight up thought it was dumb: talismans. Wait, it's a consumable that I have to attach to my sword or my armor before I can even use it? So it's like a potion, but worse? Why would I ever use these? I remember looking at talismans and thinking they were a dumb mechanic. And it took me longer to realize than I really care to admit that what Paizo did when they introduced talismans into the game is they were creating martial character specific consumables. Some consumables, like potions and elixirs, are character generic. Any character can use them. But some consumables, such as scrolls, are specific to spellcasters. And it never occurred to me that martial characters needed a consumable item that was intended specifically for them. Paizo created talismans as a way of giving martial characters consumable options that are specific to them inside the game. And when I realized that was the niche that Paizo was trying to fill with these items, suddenly it clicked. Just like my wizard needs to be using his scrolls, the fighter needs to be using his talismans if he wants to be operating at full efficiency. So don't overlook those consumables. They are an important part of your gear, your treasure, and your effectiveness as a player in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. But now we come to number 5, which is action variety is very important in this game. The 3-action economy of Pathfinder 2nd Edition is universally loved. It's easy to understand, it's quick, it's simple. You got 3 actions and a reaction on your turn. What do you want to do? And those actions can be anything up to and including, I just want to hit it 3 times. But the reality of the multiple attack penalty that comes inside of the game creates a situation where attacking 3 times in a turn is almost always a terrible option. If you want to waste one of your actions, attack 3 times. Now, there are specific builds where attacking multiple times is actually the goal and you can be really good at it. Flurry Ranger, Agile Weapons, go. But for the vast majority of characters, you actually want to have more variety in the actions that you take And if you want to maximize your effectiveness inside the game, you need to look at some of the other actions available to you. Now, if you're going to insist on, I should always be attacking my foe, one thing I can tell you is this: just because you're attacking doesn't mean you always have to be striking. Yes, you can strike with your weapon multiple times, but you can also switch out your attacks for specific maneuvers such as grapple, shove, disarm, and trip. Now you may be asking, don't those still get the multiple attack penalty? Yes, they do. But they don't target armor class. Grapple and shove are options against an opponent's fortitude DC, and disarm and trip are options against an opponent's reflex DC. And depending on the creature that you're facing, their armor class may be really high, but their fortitude or reflex DC may be comparatively low, and so if you want to keep performing offensive actions, you can target something other than their AC by using these different combat maneuvers. But I don't think that attacking is necessarily the best way to go all of the time, or even most of the time. There are plenty of other options that you can use. Let's talk about stealth, intimidate, and deception. These are skills that you can use inside of combat. Intimidate is super easy. You can use the intimidate skill to give people the frightened condition as an action. And there are even several really nice upgrades to the intimidate skill in the skill feats inside of the game. So it is completely feasible to attack twice on your turn and then attempt to intimidate your opponent to lower their chance of success on their next turn. You're more likely to succeed because there's no multiple attack penalty, and you get some variety inside the game. Another option is feinting. Now, you have to be trained in deception, but let's go ahead and admit you're a player character, you're probably trained in deception. But you can attempt to feint versus an opponent and potentially give them flat-footed against your next strike or against any strikes you make on your next turn. Rather than attacking a third time on your round and praying that you get a 20, you can increase your chances for success when the next turn comes around. And then, going back to my conversation about stealth earlier, if you have standard cover or greater cover in combat in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you can actually use the hide action during combat and potentially give your enemies the equivalent to a 50% miss chance, or possibly make stealth rolls to go from hidden to undetected. You can actively use stealth inside of Pathfinder 2e in combat. It's actually really nice. If there are terrain features around, you can get some significant bonuses just by using your stealth skill. But what if you don't have the prerequisite skills? Are there other things you can do with that third action? Well, as I've mentioned a couple of times already, you can use the raise shield action to increase your armor class and, in tandem, decrease the likelihood of suffering a critical hit. And if you have the shield block reaction, when you raise your shield, you even gain some damage mitigation. It's kind of like having extra hit points. Imagine if a spellcaster had a repeatable spell that gave them temporary hit points every single combat. That's what raising a shield and shield block does for you. But maybe you don't have proficiency with shields. Well, I've saved my best recommendation for last, the aid action. Spend an action on your turn to give yourself a reaction to aid another character. Why is this so powerful? Reactions do not use multiple attack penalties, which means that if you want to aid your ally's attack roll, instead of having a miserable chance to hit yourself, you can roll versus a DC 20, which isn't even that bad at level 1. You can roll versus a DC 20 and potentially give them +2, +3, or if you're legendary, +4 on their attack roll to hit. The aid action is super powerful in Pathfinder 2e. A +1 bonus is nice, and aid, if you are legendary in what you're doing, can give your ally a +4. So any character can do this, and it's not rules as written. Technically, if you want to aid an attack, you have to use an attack, but as a game master, I'd probably be okay if one of my players came up with a really good skill use to aid another ally's attack. I'd probably allow it. Don't overlook the aid action. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, attacking just for all 3 actions on your turn is typically not your best choice. Look for that variety. There are plenty of things you can do in the game, and they are often going to have a much greater tactical impact than just swinging a 3rd time and hoping you land a 20. So those are good examples of some things you can do in combat to be more effective and to have more variety in terms of what's happening. But there is one final kind of meta issue with Pathfinder 2nd Edition that you may be experiencing. The meta issue that I'm addressing here is one that was kind of highlighted by Cody from the channel Taking 20 in his 2 controversial, I guess we'll say, videos about Pathfinder 2nd Edition, where he talked about the illusion of choice in combat. Now, I broke down a lot of my thoughts on that particular video in the first video in this series. Not going to dive too heavy back into it, but one of the things that he said is that the system tended to reward very repetitive styles of play. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this is not a criticism that is unique to Pathfinder 2nd Edition. 5e Warlock, hold my Eldritch Blast, if you know what I'm saying. But I do think that Cody may have had a bit of a point on that one. The balance of Pathfinder 2nd Edition and the way the proficiency system works can lead to repetitive styles of play, and that can be frustrating for players at the table. So what are some things that you can do to kind of get around that particular aspect of the game? Well, number 6, take advantage of the flexible features that Paizo has baked into Pathfinder 2nd Edition. There is no game that is immune to the idea of repetitive combat. Every TTRPG can have this problem. But Paizo has made some efforts to offer some flexibility to the system that can alleviate this problem and make you more successful inside of the game. Many classes have flexible options. The classic example of flexibility would be a wizard's spellbook. A wizard who takes the time to invest in their spellbook has access to a diverse array of magical options that can provide plenty of variety inside the game and also allow you to be more effective in a variety of situations. Even if you don't have a spellbook, most spellcasting classes have some method of allowing you to switch out which spells your spellcaster uses. Maybe it's different spells that you prepare when you pray in the morning as a cleric, or it may be that as a sorcerer, when you level up, you switch out some of your lower level spells. These flexible features inside the game are designed as a way to both give you variety of play and make you more effective inside the game. Another good example is an ability called Combat Flexibility for the fighter. Fighters get a free combat feat that they can switch out every day. And later they get 2 free combat feats that they can switch out every day. Whatever they want, they can take it. As a fighter, you have the option every day to switch out the tactics that you're going to focus on and the particular abilities that you want to use. Paizo has baked a lot of flexibility into this game, and when you see those features, use them. If you're a fighter and you know that you're going to be taking on flying enemies and you might not get to use your greatsword in combat today, use combat flexibility to pick up some special archery attacks and suddenly you're going to be a lot more effective in those encounters. Flexible features like this can give you the variety of play style that you want and simultaneously just make you better inside the game. But sometimes even those options are not enough. To go back to the example that Cody used in his Taking 20 video, he offered a simple build, a ranger that wanted to focus on archery. And so he talked about, if you create this ranger, here are some options that you would probably take, and here's what your optimized turn order might look like as a ranger. And then he goes on to say that that's fine at low levels, but if you do this level after level after level, it can get repetitive, it can get boring. And there is some truth to that claim. Which is why Paizo baked retraining rules into the game. One of the downtime activities, remember when I mentioned downtime earlier? One of the downtime activities that Paizo has as a part of the core rulebook is retraining. If you're tired of the options that you took with your class, retrain them. Switch them out for other options that you consider to be interesting. Are you playing a ranger who is getting a little bit tired of just shooting things with a bow? Well, spend some downtime training an animal companion and switch out some of those archery-focused class feats for the animal companion options instead. And before you say that retraining on this scale is unrealistic, anyone who practices a skill at any serious level knows that it takes regular practice to keep skills sharp. And if you don't do something for a while, you can very quickly lose that level of proficiency you may have once had. It is completely rational that a ranger inside of a fantasy game might stop practicing with their bow and after a while find that their aim isn't quite what it used to be, but hey, I've got a pet bear now, so it's still a win. Retraining rules give you that option to switch out some of the choices that you've made so that you can continue to experience new things inside the game. And by the way, let me just go ahead and say this. If you want to get the most out of Pathfinder 2nd Edition as a player, you probably need to use the retraining rules. Paizo as a company and Pathfinder in specific as a game is notorious for overload of player options. Like, that's their thing. I saw a YouTube video a while back where someone was talking about the core rulebook options in Pathfinder 2 would be enough to create a unique character for every human being on the face of the planet. That's not an exaggeration. Pathfinder is famous for being a game of options. And if you really want to experience the breadth of the options that Paizo has given you, they baked retraining into the rules for that specific reason. Paizo knows that they have a very expansive game. And Paizo knows that they have put more options inside that game than any one person or any one group could ever realistically hope to hit every single option. There is a ton of stuff you can experience with Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and I guarantee you, Paizo baked the retraining rules in so that players can switch out and try different things, do different builds, try different combos and combinations of activities. Retraining is a core rulebook official way to keep variety inside your game. And hypothetically speaking, if your ranger realized that their greatest adversary had gone underground and was deliberately holding themselves up in a location designed to limit the effectiveness of archery and ranged combat, wouldn't it make sense for your ranger to spend some time practicing with dual weapons or training a bear to help them get into that particularly tight location? The retraining rules not only give you flexibility in how the game is played, but as I've pointed out with other options in this video, can make you more effective inside the game. Do not overlook the power of retraining as a player. I guarantee you it is something you want to take advantage of in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So, this video is already super long, and I've only hit 6 player tips so far. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the video here. But let me throw the conversation over to you. What are some player tips that you have for people who might be struggling with Pathfinder 2nd Edition? What are some things that they can do to be more effective inside the game? What are some things that they can do to have more variety or interesting encounters inside the game? What tips would you offer to help players get the most out of Pathfinder 2e? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, like it, share it, subscribe to the channel. Next week's video, I'm going to talk specifically to Game Masters about Pathfinder 2e and what you can do to improve the game at your table. So I hope you will come back next week and be a part of that conversation as well. But thank you for joining me and for being a part of this conversation. Have a wonderful day.